All right, get ready because this deep dive, well, it's going to take us into some pretty interesting territory, I think. The world of, like everyday English conversations.
Yeah.
We're going to be kind of dissecting this YouTube video that was designed for, English language learners.
Right.
But honestly, the stuff we're going to be talking about is relevant to anyone who's, ever thought about how the ways we use language kind of shape how we interact with each other.
For sure.
So what do you think? I mean, what's so interesting about this kind of like analysis?
Well, to me, it's like we're revealing this hidden like mechanics of communication. You know, these conversations, I mean, they seem so simple, they seem so mundane,
Right.
but they're actually like packed with cultural insights.
Oh, for sure.
They can tell us everything from like social hierarchies to unspoken, rules of etiquette. It's really fascinating.
Okay, so let's jump right in.
Right.
First scenario, a job interview. We all know how that feels, right? Trying to make a good first impression.
Oh, absolutely.
Kind of nervous energy.
Yeah.
And the transcript really captures that the person who's being interviewed uses phrases like expand my communication skills and contribute to the development of the company. It's all very like almost like a script. It's like they planned it out very carefully.
Totally. Yeah, it is fascinating how deliberate these phrases are.
Right.
They're not just about saying, what they've done.
Right.
They're about positioning themselves, as an asset
to
the company.
Exactly.
Like expand my communication skills. That suggests a desire for growth. Right?
Yes.
And then contribute to the development of the company.
Yeah.
Well, that aligns them with the company's goals.
That's right.
So it's subtle, but it's a really powerful way to kind of, frame their experience in a positive light.
Right. And it's not just about soft skills.
Right.
They also say things like 5 years of experience in sales and promotion. And even mention, wanting to train their future team.
Yeah.
To me, I don't know. That sounds like a real go-getter.
Definitely.
But then they go even further and they say that they want to be a sales manager in 5 years.
Wow.
That level of ambition, is that typical in a job interview?
It's a bold move.
Okay.
I think it depends on a lot of different things,
Oh, really?
like the company, the role, the person who's interviewing them.
Yeah.
I mean, some people might see that as impressive and forward thinking, you know,
Yeah.
but others, they might see it as presumptuous.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's a risk.
That's where it gets really interesting to me, is like the same words can be interpreted in such different ways depending on
Totally. Yeah. The context is everything.
the context, right?
Yeah. And that's where, cultural understanding becomes like super important. In some cultures, like being direct and being ambitious, that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
But in others, being humble and being deferential is more appropriate.
So interesting.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's go from the high-pressure job interview world to something a little bit more relaxed.
Okay.
A seafood restaurant.
Oh, nice.
I gotta say, as a bit of a foodie myself,
Uh-huh.
I was pretty interested to see the food on the menu.
What was on there?
Smoked salmon mousse,
Okay.
shrimp dip, lobster,
Wow.
king crab. This sounds like a fancy place.
It does. Yeah. The menu definitely suggests a certain level of sophistication.
For sure.
But what I find really interesting here
Yeah.
is how polite everyone is being.
Oh, yeah.
The waiter uses phrases like, I suggest you try.
Mm-hmm.
And the customer's like, I'd like to have. And I'll go
Oh.
for this kind of like dance of politeness.
Yes.
It's so typical of how people interact in English, you know?
Especially in like service situations.
Totally. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like they're following a script, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Like everyone knows their lines.
Right.
And even when the waiter's making recommendations,
Yeah.
they're very careful to say, I suggest you try.
Mm-hmm.
Not, you should try this.
Right.
It's subtle, but it gives the customer a feeling of choice.
Exactly. Yeah. It's about like guiding the customer's experience, but without being, too pushy.
Right.
And that emphasis on individual choice, I mean, that's really important in a lot of Western cultures.
Okay.
In other cultures, the waiter might be more direct.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like they might tell you what to order
Wow.
based on their expertise,
Yeah.
and they'd expect the customer to just trust their judgment.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if those like little tiny linguistic differences are like part of bigger cultural perceptions.
Could be, yeah.
All right, well, now for something completely different, reporting a burglary.
Oh, well.
So the transcript shows, all the important information, like when it happened, what was stolen,
Right.
description of the suspect. But the thing that stood out to me most was how different the tone was from the previous scenarios.
For sure, yeah. The language is so much more direct, right?
Yeah.
There's no, small talk. There's no pleasantries.
Right.
It's all about getting the information across clearly and quickly.
Yes.
Phrases like, broke my window, looked like a mess, and stole $1,000 in cash.
Mm-hmm.
It's just straight to the point.
Right, to the point. And it kind of reminds you that language can be used for, building connections, but it can also be used to share urgent information in a crisis. There's no room for misunderstanding when you're calling the police.
Right, yeah, you got to be clear.
So speaking of needing help, let's move on to the next scenario, asking for directions. Getting lost, that's something that everyone experiences at some point.
Totally. Doesn't matter what language you speak or what culture you're from.
Right.
Everyone gets lost.
It's true. But what's interesting here is how the language used to give directions really depends on spatial reasoning and visual cues.
Right. You got to create a picture in your mind.
Right. So they use phrases like go straight ahead, turn left, and at the opposite of it. It's all about, making a mental map.
Yeah, like a verbal GPS.
Right.
Guiding you step by step.
Yes. And then they take it a step further.
Okay.
And they start mentioning landmarks.
I
like the 2 quarters and the flower shop. I love how those little specific details help you visualize the route.
It makes it so much easier to follow, even if you don't know the area.
It's a great example of how language adapts to the specific needs of a situation.
Exactly, yeah. It's not just about conveying information.
Right.
It's about guiding someone through space.
It's true. All right, let's take a little side trip to the grocery store.
Okay.
This conversation, it's packed with useful vocabulary, vegetable stall, fruit stall, dairy products, cabbages, lettuce, milk. It's like a mini lesson in supermarket terminology. But what I found interesting was how the way they talk actually reflects the layout of the store.
That's true. Yeah, the way they move from section to section, vegetables, fruits, dairy, tells you a lot about how, English-speaking supermarkets organize their food.
Exactly. And it's not just the words themselves.
Right.
It's the order that they use them in. It's like they're walking you through the aisles.
Yes. Like you're right there with them.
It's a reminder that language isn't just about giving information. It's also about kind of reflecting our physical experiences.
Totally. And this simple conversation about grocery shopping, it can actually tell us a lot about, cultural values and assumptions about food.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm ready for a change of scenery again.
All right.
Or where are we going? Let's talk about sending a letter.
Oh, interesting.
It seems so old-fashioned now, right?
It does, yeah. In the age of email and text messaging.
Right.
Who sends letters anymore?
I know, but there's something kind of charming about it,
Yeah, I get it.
The physical act of writing on paper, finding the right envelope, putting a stamp on it, going to the mailbox.
There's a certain, ritual to it,
Yes, and the transcript really captures that. It highlights the steps involved and the specific language that's used. Right. Things like put it in an envelope, stick a stamp on it, drop it in the mailbox.
It's like a little time capsule.
It is, yeah.
Of a bygone era.
It's a reminder that language doesn't just change over time.
Right.
It also kind of preserves echoes of the past.
I love that.
It shows how we used to do things.
And the values we used to have.
Yeah, the mailbox itself has become like a symbol of, a slow or more deliberate form of communication.
Right. It's interesting to compare the language we use to talk about sending a letter with the language we use to talk about sending an email or a text message.
Totally. It's totally different. It reflects how technology has changed.
Yes.
And how the speed of communication has changed.
Exactly. All right. Let's shift gears again.
Okay.
This time to the academic world.
Oh, all right.
We're going to listen in on a conversation between 2 university students.
Okay.
They're comparing their class schedules.
Sounds good.
And to me, This conversation really captures what it's like to be on a big university campus, with all the buildings and classrooms and different floors.
Absolutely. It's like its own little world, right?
It is.
With its own rules and codes and language.
True.
Phrases like heading to my economics class and my classroom is in the F building.
I mean, that might sound like gibberish to someone who's not a student.
Right.
But to these students, it's just like everyday life.
It's their reality. It's amazing how quickly we adapt to new environments and develop this like shared language. To navigate them, I also noticed that they use phrases like, what floor is it on?
Right.
And it's on the 4th floor.
Yeah, it's all about like spatial awareness, right? And being clear.
Clear communication is so important.
Yeah, especially in a complex setting like that.
Exactly. And it's not just about finding your way around. It's also about like creating a sense of belonging.
Yeah, that shared language of student life. It helps them connect with each other.
Exactly. Okay, for our last scenario in this part of our deep dive, we're going to tackle a classic dilemma, choosing a movie.
Ooh, I like it.
This conversation is so insightful. It shows how people express their preferences, how they negotiate with each other, how they ultimately make decisions. And it's amazing how much they convey in just a few short exchanges.
It's like a masterclass in conversational efficiency,
It is. In just a few sentences, we learn about all the different genres they're considering. Horror, psychological thriller, comedy, romance.
Right.
And we get a glimpse into what they like and dislike.
It's true.
And it's not just about saying what they like, it's about justifying it. Right.
Yeah.
So they say things like, I've been into horror genres recently, and I want to watch something hilarious.
Yeah, they're giving a reason for their choices.
Yes.
And inviting the other person to understand their perspective.
Exactly. And I think it's a subtle but important difference.
Okay.
Instead of just saying, I like horror movies, they're saying, this is what I'm enjoying right now. It shows a level of self-awareness, It's like they're saying, this is how I'm feeling right now, but I'm open to other things.
Totally. And that reflects like a cultural value on individual autonomy and the freedom to change your mind.
I'm starting to realize that these conversations that seem so simple are actually like these little windows into different culture.
That's exactly it. They reveal so much about the values and beliefs of the people who are talking.
Wow, it's really fascinating.
Yeah, it highlights how important cultural awareness is when you're communicating, right?
Yeah.
What might be polite in one culture might be rude in another.
It's true.
What might be appropriate in one culture might be offensive in another.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Welcome back. After that first round of conversations, I don't know about you, but I'm already thinking about all this stuff.
Me too. And we've only just scratched the surface. I'm ready to dig a little deeper into, those cultural insights you mentioned earlier.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
What else kind of jumps out at you when you think back on these scenarios?
Well, one thing I keep thinking about is how important politeness is in these English conversations. Like, take the restaurant scene, for example.
Yeah.
The customer uses phrases like, I'd like to have, and I'll go for.
Right.
Instead of just saying, give me the lobster.
Right.
It sounds softer. It sounds more polite.
It does. And it's not just the customer.
Right.
The waiter also uses phrases like, I suggest you try.
Exactly.
Instead of, this one's the best.
Right. They're being suggestive.
Yeah.
But they're not being, pushy.
Right. They're guiding the customer without being too assertive.
Exactly. It's like a dance of indirectness.
Yeah.
And it's really common in a lot of English-speaking cultures, especially, North America, the UK. It's about being formal, being respectful, even in casual settings.
It's like there's this set of rules that everyone knows, even though no one ever talks about them.
Totally. It's like an unspoken code of conduct.
Yeah. And this code, it goes beyond just politeness.
Right.
It also influences how people express, their opinions.
Oh, for sure.
Their preferences.
Yeah.
Remember in the movie conversation, the person didn't say, I love horror movies. They said, I've been into horror genres recently.
Exactly. It's just a more subtle way of saying what they like.
Yeah, it's so much more nuanced.
Yeah.
And to me, it also kind of suggests that they're aware of how their tastes are changing,
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like they're acknowledging that this liking horror movies, it's a new thing for them.
Right.
It's not like a fixed part of their personality.
Right. And it's almost like they're saying,
Yeah.
this is what I'm into right now, but, I'm open to other things.
Yeah.
And I think that reflects a cultural value that's placed on individuality,
Right.
and freedom, the freedom to change your mind.
Mm-hmm. I'm starting to see these conversations as like little cultural ethnographies.
Yeah, totally.
They tell us so much about the values and beliefs of the people who are speaking.
That's exactly it. And it really highlights the importance of cultural awareness when you're communicating, right?
Right.
Because what might be considered polite in one culture might be considered rude in another.
That's a good point. So we've talked about politeness, indirectness, individual expression. What other cultural values do you think we can kind of pull out of these conversations?
Well, one thing that stands out to me is this focus on efficiency and clarity.
Yeah.
Especially in situations where time is really important.
Right.
Like, think about the burglary report.
Yeah.
There's no time for small talk,
Right.
You need to get the information across quickly and clearly.
Yeah, the language was very direct and to the point.
Exactly. And that reflects a cultural value on practicality, on getting things done.
Okay.
And we see that same emphasis on efficiency in other scenarios too.
Okay.
Like when they're talking about sending a letter, the instructions are very specific. There's no room for interpretation.
It's like every word matters.
Yeah, every word has a purpose.
I wonder if that need for efficiency is somehow related to, the fact that modern life is just so fast-paced.
It's an interesting thought, right?
Yeah.
Maybe in a world where everything's moving so quickly, we just need to be more direct with our communication.
Right.
To save time.
Yeah. Speaking of different cases of life, I keep thinking about the conversation about asking for directions.
Oh, yeah.
It's such a universal experience, getting lost, needing help from a stranger.
It doesn't matter where you're from, everyone's been there.
It's true. And what's interesting is that the language they use really relies on, those visual cues and landmarks.
Right. They're trying to create a picture in your mind.
Yeah, they're painting a picture with their words.
Exactly. Yeah.
Go straight ahead, turn left at the 2 quarters, at the opposite of the flower shop.
It's all about creating a visual path.
Yeah. Yeah. And those specific landmarks,
Yeah.
they make it so much easier to follow the directions.
They do, even if you've never been to that place before.
Right. It's a great example of how language adapts to the needs of a situation.
Absolutely. It's amazing to me how these conversations keep reminding us that language is so much more than just words.
It's true.
It's a tool for navigating the world, connecting with people, expressing ourselves.
It really is. And we've only just begun to explore, the richness and complexity of English.
Right. There's still so much more to discover.
There's so much more to uncover. Well, I'm ready to keep digging.
Me too.
Let's take a short break and then come back for the final part of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
We'll explore even more fascinating aspects of these, seemingly ordinary conversations. Okay, we're back for the last part of our deep dive into everyday English conversations, and it's amazing how much we've already talked about just by,
I know, right?
looking closely at these conversations that seem so simple on the surface.
Yeah, it's incredible how much we can learn.
We've seen how these conversations are like little cultural compasses, pointing to all these underlying values and beliefs.
That's true.
We've also seen how language adapts to specific situations.
Yeah, totally.
It's becoming a tool for navigating all sorts of things, from job interviews to asking for directions.
Absolutely. It's like language is this incredibly versatile instrument.
It really is, and something that keeps coming back to me is how all of these conversations, even though they're so different, they also reveal this common thread of humanity.
Right.
Whether it's, the nerves of a job interview or the experience of getting lost, there's this shared understanding that goes beyond culture,
Absolutely, and that's what I find so fascinating about language.
Yeah.
It has this power to both highlight our differences and connect us through shared experiences.
It's true. As we've been talking about these English conversations, I've been thinking about how different they might sound in other parts of the world, for example.
Right.
The level of formality in that restaurant scene could be totally different in another culture.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, in some cultures, that interaction between the customer and the waiter.
Yeah.
It might be way more elaborate.
Right.
You know, they might use special titles or honorifics.
Yeah.
Maybe even specific gestures.
Right.
Or in other cultures, it might be like super casual.
Interesting.
You know, not so much emphasis on indirectness.
That's so fascinating to think about. And I imagine the way people express their opinions and preferences could also be totally different. Some cultures might encourage people to be very direct, while others might value, being more subtle and nuanced.
Exactly, yeah. It's all about understanding those cultural nuances.
Right.
When you're communicating with people from different backgrounds.
Speaking of different backgrounds, what about that conversation between the university students?
Yeah.
It felt very specific to that environment.
Didn't it?
With all the challenges and the lingo and stuff.
Right. I mean, navigating a big university campus.
Yeah.
It's definitely a unique experience.
Right.
But, on a deeper level, I think it also reflects this universal human experience of feeling lost and trying to find your way,
Yeah, it's a great point.
Not just literally on a campus, but, metaphorically in life.
We've all been there.
Exactly, yeah.
Those moments where you feel disoriented and you need to ask for help.
It just highlights how important clear communication is.
Right.
And having good signage,
It's true. It's amazing how those little phrases like go straight ahead, turn left, it's on the 4th floor, they can be so helpful in those situations.
Absolutely. They give you a sense of direction when you're feeling totally lost.
Okay, so we've talked about cultural differences, universal experiences, the importance of clear communication. As we wrap up this deep dive, what other key takeaways would you say are important for our listeners to remember?
Well, one thing that's really stuck with me is that language isn't static.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, it's not set in stone.
Okay.
It's constantly evolving, changing, adapting to new situations, new technologies.
Right.
The way we communicate today is so different from how people communicated, even a few decades ago.
It's true. Think about the difference between sending a letter and watching a movie.
Exactly.
One's this ancient form of communication. The other one's a product of modern technology.
Yeah. And it's amazing how these different forms of communication they coexist, they influence each other.
That's a great point. The language we use online, it's often so much more informal, more abbreviated than the language we use in person.
Totally, yeah. It's like each conversation is a little time capsule.
It is.
Capturing a moment in time.
Yeah.
The cultural norms, the technology.
Yeah.
Even the anxieties of that era.
It's fascinating to think about, and it just reminds us that language is this dynamic, ever-changing thing.
Exactly. It's shaped by the people who use it, the technology they use, the world they live in.
Well said. And as we all try to navigate, this constantly changing world, I think it's more important than ever to pay attention to the subtleties of language.
Yeah.
It's a powerful tool for understanding ourselves, connecting with each other, making sense of the world around us.
Couldn't agree more. The next time you're ordering a coffee, asking for directions, even just chatting with a friend, take a moment to really appreciate the beauty of language.
I love that. And who knows, you might even discover some hidden cultural insights along the way.
Exactly.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of everyday English conversations.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep those ears open and those minds curious. All right, gotta say you've really outdone yourself with this this batch of YouTube transcripts this time. We've got vacation plans and snippets from people booking hotels, some educational videos, even conversations about family life. Wow, talk about a mixed bag.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like a time capsule almost of just everyday life.
Right.
We're getting these little glimpses into how people are traveling these days, learning how they're even structuring their families. It's fascinating.
Okay, so let's unpack this, and I guess we could start with those travel conversations. We've got one person planning a working holiday in Mexico, teaching English to kids, which I think is a pretty cool way to, experience another culture.
Absolutely. And it speaks to this, I think, growing trend of combining travel with like personal and professional development. It's not just about escaping anymore, right?
Yeah.
It's about, enriching yourself in the process.
Yeah, definitely. And then we have someone else prepping for a language immersion trip to Paris. I'm a little jealous of that one. It makes you wonder, though, with language learning apps so readily available now, like, is the motivation for a trip like that shifting? Is it less about just pure language acquisition and more about the cultural immersion part of it?
That's a great question. And I think, the hotel booking conversations kind of give us some clues there. Remember the one where the traveler was adamant about finding a hotel with a multimedia center?
Oh, yeah.
It seems like they're still prioritizing access to technology, even on a language immersion trip.
That's a really good point. Yeah, it shows how technology is like impacting even the way we approach language learning. Okay, but back to those vacation conversations for a second. Who could forget that hilarious exchange about the dreaded dinner cruise?
I hate the sea. I'll be sick with fear if the waves are big.
Oh, so good.
Classic case of vacation incompatibility, right?
Totally. But it also makes me think about how travel priorities might be changing in general. Is that classic relaxation vacation becoming less appealing? Are people looking for more active or engaging experiences?
Yeah. Certainly something to ponder, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of engaging experiences, let's shift gears a bit to those education-themed transcripts.
Yeah.
It's amazing how many different learning environments we see represented in just this small sample.
Right. We've got everything from a summer dance school that's adjusting its timetable to meet demand, to an online safety guide for parents who are, trying to navigate the whole digital world. And then there's this youth camp in Ireland that seems to be trying to find a balance between outdoor adventure and more structured activities.
It's almost like a microcosm of, the broader educational landscape, right?
Yeah.
With traditional institutions kind of adapting to meet these modern needs, and of course this growing emphasis on experiences beyond just the classroom.
Right, and speaking of traditional institutions, we also have some sources that talk about the Duke of Edinburgh's award. The one where you have to hike for miles, learn a new skill, basically become a wilderness expert.
Well, maybe not a wilderness expert, but it does emphasize, self-reliance, leadership, community involvement.
Right.
It's a very structured program though, right?
Yeah.
With specific requirements at each level. And it's all assessed by these qualified individuals.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, we have those student projects on natural phenomena, which seem to be much more free form in their approach.
Right.
It makes you wonder, are these contrasting approaches to learning a reflection of broader societal shifts?
Yeah.
Are we moving away from rigid structures towards more individualized learning paths?
That's a fascinating question. And it's something that we actually see reflected in other sources as well, particularly those dealing with family structures.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing, a move away from that traditional nuclear family model.
Yeah.
We're seeing more single parent families, blended families, even adults choosing to live with their parents for much longer now.
I was struck by the statistic. I think it was about 10% of men in their early 30s in the UK still living at home, which really highlights the, economic pressures facing young people today. But it also makes me wonder, how does this shift in living arrangements impact family dynamics? Oh. Are traditional roles and expectations kind of changing as a result?
Yeah, those are some big questions. And I think the personal stories that we see in the transcripts provide a really interesting window into these shifting dynamics. For example, we hear from a single parent who's now engaged in trying to blend families.
Right.
And it's clear that these are very complex situations, often with no easy answers.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely adds a human element to these broader sociological trends. And then we have that extended household where, they talk about being cramped for space, but rich in relationships.
Yeah.
It reminds us that family isn't just about blood ties. It's about the bonds that we create and the support systems that we rely on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And speaking of support systems, it's interesting to compare these modern families to the glimpses we get of Victorian family life in some of these transcripts.
Yeah.
The contrast is really stark, especially between the upper and lower class experiences.
The upper class families with their servants and nannies and tutors, it's a completely different world.
Right.
But even within that structure, there were still challenges, weren't there?
Absolutely. The sources highlight how Victorian families also grappled with issues of gender roles, work-life balance, the pressures of maintaining a certain social status.
Right.
It's a good reminder that, while the outward forms of family life may change over time, the underlying challenges and dynamics, those often persist.
It really puts things in perspective, doesn't it? To see
Yeah.
how much has changed over time, but also to recognize those things that kind of remain constant.
Precisely. And that actually brings us to an interesting point, right?
Yep.
We've seen how economic pressures kind of shaped those Victorian families. And it's fascinating to consider how modern economic forces, things like the rising cost of living,
Oh.
are influencing family structures today.
Right, especially when you consider those statistics about young adults living at home longer. It's
Right.
not just a cultural phenomenon, it's an economic reality for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's not just economics at play here. Technology is also obviously a huge factor shaping modern life.
Yeah.
And these transcripts offer some, I think, really intriguing clues about its influence.
Oh, are you talking about those transcripts on online safety for kids?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a whole new world for parents to navigate. I can't imagine trying to keep up with all the latest apps and platforms and everything.
It's a real challenge. And the sources really emphasize the importance of open communication in education, right?
Yeah.
Parents are encouraged to be really proactive, not just setting boundaries, but also helping their children develop those critical thinking skills they need to, navigate the digital world safely.
It's not just about saying no, it's about giving them the tools to make their own smart choices.
Exactly.
Which is a great segue into, I think, another theme that we see kind of emerging from these transcripts.
Right.
The evolution of learning itself. We see those traditional institutions like that summer dance school adapting to meet demand, but we also see these like alternative approaches like that youth camp in Ireland that blends, the outdoor adventure with more structured activities.
Right. And then you have those student projects, those natural phenomena projects, where the learning seems to be driven by, curiosity and exploration rather than a set curriculum.
It's a fascinating juxtaposition. On the one hand, you have programs like the Duke of Edinburgh's Award, which has this very specific framework.
Yeah.
Set activities, skills to be mastered, external assessments. It's about achieving those predefined goals.
You earn the badges, you climb the ranks, there's a clear path to follow.
Exactly. But then you have these other examples like the student projects where the learning seems much more organic,
Yeah.
It's about following your curiosity, making your own discoveries, and maybe the assessment is more about like personal growth than meeting external standards.
That's such a good point. It's almost like these different approaches represent different philosophies of education, right?
Yeah.
One is about achieving a specific set of outcomes. The other is about cultivating a mindset of like exploration and lifelong learning.
And maybe the key is finding the right balance between those two approaches.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, we need both structure and freedom to truly thrive, both in learning and in life.
Absolutely. Okay, now for a topic that always seems to spark some debate, family structures. We've already touched on how economic forces and technology are playing a role.
Right.
But these transcripts also give us a glimpse into like the human side of these changes.
Yeah.
We hear from that single parent trying to blend families, which highlights, I think, those complexities and the emotional challenges involved in navigating those situations.
Yeah, it's a reminder that these aren't just abstract trends.
Right.
These are real people's lives.
Right.
And then we have that extended household, where they talk about being cramped for space, but rich in relationships. And it makes you think about those trade-offs that we make when it comes to like family and living arrangements.
Absolutely. And it challenges, I think, that notion that there's one right way to structure a family.
Right.
These transcripts show us that families come in all shapes and sizes, right?
Yeah,
And what matters most is the love, the support, the connection within those units.
for sure. Now, speaking of different perspectives, we also see some contrasting viewpoints on like the impact of these changing family structures, don't we? Some people argue that the decline of that traditional nuclear family has negative consequences for society as a whole.
While others maintain that these changes reflect progress and adaptation to new social and economic realities.
Right, it's a complex issue with valid points, I think, on both sides.
Yeah.
And it's a debate that's likely to continue. But what I find interesting is that even in those contrasting viewpoints, there's a shared concern for the well-being of children. Everyone wants what's best for the next generation, even if they disagree on how to achieve that.
That's a great observation, and it highlights the importance of approaching these conversations with empathy and a willingness to try to understand those different perspectives.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that came up in several transcripts. The whole world of online safety. It seems like every parent is struggling with this these days.
And for good reason. I mean, the internet has become so integral to children's lives, for better or for worse. It's a powerful tool for education, connection, entertainment, but of course, it comes with risks.
Like cyberbullying, exposure to, inappropriate content, even privacy concerns. It's enough to make any parent want to, lock up all the devices and throw away the key.
I understand that impulse, but the sources emphasize that it's not about, shutting down access to technology altogether.
Right.
It's about being informed, setting boundaries, and most importantly, having those open and honest conversations with children about the potential dangers.
It's about empowering them to be, responsible digital citizens.
Exactly. And it's interesting to note that this emphasis on digital literacy actually ties back to those broader themes of education we were discussing earlier.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just about acquiring knowledge anymore, right? It's about developing those critical thinking skills, media literacy, the ability to navigate this rapidly changing world.
And speaking of navigating a changing world, let's talk about the transcripts that deal with environmental responsibility. There's a real sense of urgency in those conversations.
Absolutely. The sources highlight, the impact of human activities on the planet, from climate change and pollution to deforestation and resource depletion. It's a stark reminder that our choices have consequences, both for ourselves and, of course, for future generations.
And it's not just about, governments and corporations taking action. It's about individuals making conscious choices in their daily lives.
Right.
Like reducing our carbon footprint, conserving water and energy, being mindful of our consumption habits.
It's about recognizing that we're all part of a larger ecosystem.
Yeah.
And that our actions have ripple effects.
Okay, time for another blast from the past. Those transcripts about Victorian family life. They were fascinating, but they also raised some questions about how much has really changed.
It's true. Certain aspects of Victorian family life may seem, archaic to us now, but there are also some surprising parallels.
Like the emphasis on social status and the pressure to conform to certain norms.
Exactly. And the sources also highlight those challenges that Victorian families faced in balancing, work and family life, which is something many people can relate to today.
Not to mention the anxieties around raising children in a rapidly changing world.
Right.
It seems like that's a universal experience no matter what era you're in.
It certainly makes you wonder what future historians will say about our current family structures and societal norms.
Oh, now there's a thought. It's like we're all part of this ongoing social experiment, figuring things out as we go along.
And these transcripts offer a fascinating snapshot of that experiment in progress.
Okay, let's bring things back to the present and talk about those transcripts that explore the importance of community involvement. There's a real sense of optimism in those conversations, I think.
Absolutely. The sources highlight the benefits of, connecting with others, building meaningful relationships, contributing to something larger than ourselves.
It's about finding a sense of belonging, making a difference, and creating a more vibrant and supportive community.
And it's something that's accessible to everyone, regardless of age, background, or interests. I mean, there are countless ways to get involved, from volunteering at a local charity to simply being a good neighbor.
It's a reminder that we're all interconnected, and that even small acts of kindness can have a ripple effect.
And those small acts can often lead to bigger things. Think about all the social movements and community initiatives that started with just a few people coming together with a shared vision.
It's inspiring to think about the power of collective action.
And it's a reminder that we don't have to wait for someone else to make a difference. We can all be agents of change in our own communities.
Okay, let's talk about something that always gets me excited. Creativity. Those transcripts about the arts were a real treat.
They were. And it's wonderful to see how the sources emphasize the importance of creative expression, regardless of skill level or artistic background.
It's not about being, a virtuoso. It's about tapping into that innate human desire to create and to express ourselves.
Whether it's through music, dance, visual arts, writing, or any other form of creative expression, the act of creating can be incredibly therapeutic and fulfilling.
It's a way to connect with our emotions, explore new ideas, and share our unique perspective with the world.
And the beauty of it is that there are no right or wrong answers in art. Right, it's all about personal expression and interpretation.
Okay, time to put on our thinking caps. Those transcripts about psychology and human behavior. Fascinating, but also a little bit mind-bending.
They certainly are. I mean, the human mind is incredibly complex, and these transcripts offer just a glimpse into, the many factors that shape our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, each layer revealing new insights and complexities.
And the more we understand about ourselves, the better equipped we are, right? to navigate life's challenges, to build stronger relationships, to live more fulfilling lives.
Speaking of navigating challenges, those transcripts about critical thinking and problem solving really got me thinking. It seems like we're facing, more and more complex problems these days, and traditional solutions just aren't cutting it anymore.
You're absolutely right. The sources emphasize the importance of moving beyond, like simplistic thinking and embracing complexity, challenging assumptions, seeking those creative solutions.
It's not about having all the answers, it's about asking the right questions, being willing to think outside the box.
And it's a skill set that's becoming increasingly valuable in today's world, whether we're facing, personal challenges, professional dilemmas, global issues. The ability to think critically and creatively is essential.
Okay, let's wrap things up with those transcripts that focus on self-reflection and personal growth. I always find this to be the most thought-provoking.
Me too. They remind us that the journey of self-discovery is ongoing, right?
Yeah.
And that we all have that capacity to grow and evolve throughout our lives.
It's about being honest with ourselves, acknowledging our strengths and weaknesses, and setting intentions for, who we want to become.
And it's not always easy. Self-reflection can be uncomfortable at times, but it's also incredibly rewarding. It allows us to gain a deeper understanding of ourselves, our motivations, our values.
That self-awareness is essential for living a more authentic and fulfilling life.
Exactly. It allows us to make choices that are aligned with our values, to build more meaningful relationships, and to contribute to the world in a way that feels purposeful.
All right. It feels like we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. From vacation plans to Victorian families to the future of education.
It's amazing how these seemingly disparate topics are all interconnected, isn't it?
It really is. And it's a reminder that learning isn't just about acquiring knowledge. It's about making connections, challenging assumptions, and expanding our understanding of, the world and ourselves.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that learning, isn't just about acquiring knowledge. It's about making connections, challenging assumptions, and really expanding our understanding of the world, and ourselves.
Right. Like those connections we were just making between Victorian family structures and modern day family structures. It's crazy. Okay, so speaking of online safety, we talked a bit about it before, but it seems like every parent in these transcripts is struggling with this.
Yeah, it's a whole new world out there, and the internet has become so integral to children's lives. For better or worse. I mean, it's this powerful tool, obviously, for education, for connection, entertainment. But of course, it comes with some pretty serious risks.
Like cyberbullying, we've seen, exposure to, inappropriate content, privacy concerns. It's like, I get why any parent would just want to throw all the devices out the window sometimes.
Oh, I totally understand that impulse. But the sources really emphasize that it's not about completely shutting down access to technology altogether.
Right.
It's about being informed as a parent, setting boundaries, and most importantly, having those open and honest conversations with your kids about the potential dangers.
It's about empowering them, right, to be responsible digital citizens.
Exactly. And what's so interesting is that this whole emphasis on digital literacy kind of ties back to those broader themes of education that we were discussing earlier.
Oh, right.
It's not just about acquiring knowledge anymore. It's about really developing these essential critical thinking skills, media literacy, the ability to sort of navigate this rapidly changing world.
And speaking of navigating a changing world, we should talk about those transcripts that deal with environmental responsibility.
Oh, yeah.
There's a real sense of urgency in those conversations.
Absolutely, yeah. The sources highlight the impact of human activities, on the planet.
Yeah.
We're talking climate change, pollution, deforestation, resource depletion. It's a pretty stark reminder, I think, that our choices have consequences.
Right.
Both for ourselves and, of course, for future generations.
And it's not just about, governments and corporations taking action. It's also about individuals making more conscious choices, like in their daily lives, like reducing our carbon footprint, conserving water and energy, being mindful, of our consumption habits in general.
It's about recognizing that we're all a part of this larger ecosystem and that our actions really do have these ripple effects.
So true. Okay, time for, I guess, another blast from the past. Those transcripts about Victorian family life.
Yeah.
Fascinating. But it also raised some questions, at least for me, about how much has really changed.
I know, right? I mean, certain aspects of, Victorian family life might seem, archaic to us now, But there are also some surprising parallels.
Like the emphasis on social status and, that pressure to conform to certain norms.
Exactly. And the sources also highlight those challenges that Victorian families faced when trying to balance, work and family life, which is something that I think so many people can relate to even today.
And not to mention those anxieties around raising children, especially in such a rapidly changing world.
Right.
It seems like that's a universal experience no matter what era you're living in.
It certainly makes you wonder what those future historians are going to say about our current family structures and our societal norms.
No, there's a thought. It's like we're all just part of this ongoing massive social experiment, figuring things out as we go.
Yeah. And these transcripts kind of offer this fascinating snapshot of that experiment in progress.
Okay, let's bring things back to the present for a minute and talk about those transcripts that explore, the importance of community involvement.
Yeah.
There's a real sense of optimism, I think, in those conversations.
Absolutely. The sources highlight the benefits of connecting with others, building, meaningful relationships, and contributing to something larger than yourself.
It's about finding that sense of belonging, right? Making a difference, creating a more vibrant and supportive community.
And it's something that's accessible to, literally everyone, regardless of your age, background, or interests. I mean, there's so many ways to get involved, from volunteering at a local charity to simply being a good neighbor.
Right. It's a good reminder that we're all interconnected and that, even small acts of kindness can have these big ripple effects.
And, those small acts often can lead to much bigger things. Think about all of those social movements and community initiatives that started with just a few people coming together, with this shared vision.
It's inspiring to think about that power of collective action.
It's a good reminder that you don't have to wait for someone else to make a difference. You can be an agent of change right in your own community.
Okay, let's talk about something that I think always gets me excited, and that's creativity. Those transcripts about, the arts were such a treat.
Oh, they were. And it's wonderful how the sources emphasize the importance of, creative expression, regardless of your skill level or your background.
It's not about, being a virtuoso. It's about tapping into that innate human desire to create and to express ourselves.
Whether it's through music, dance, visual arts, writing, any other form of creative expression, that act of creating can be incredibly therapeutic and fulfilling.
It's a way to, connect with your emotions, explore new ideas, and share your unique perspective with the world.
And the beauty of it is that there are no right or wrong answers in art, right? It's all about personal expression and interpretation.
Okay, time to put on our thinking caps. Those transcripts about psychology and human behavior, wow. Fascinating, but also a little bit mind-bending.
I know, right? The human mind is so complex. And these transcripts just kind of offer this tiny little glimpse into all of those different factors that shape our thoughts and our emotions and our behaviors.
It's like, as you said before, peeling back those layers of an onion. And each layer kind of reveals, new insights and complexities.
And the more we understand about ourselves, the better equipped we are to navigate all of those, life's challenges, to build strong relationships, and to live more fulfilling lives.
Oh, speaking of navigating challenges, those transcripts about critical thinking and problem solving, those really got me thinking. It seems like, we're facing more and more complex problems these days, and those traditional solutions just aren't cutting it anymore.
You're absolutely right. The sources really emphasize the importance of moving beyond, simplistic thinking and embracing complexity, challenging assumptions, and seeking those creative solutions.
It's not about having all the answers. It's about asking those right questions.
Yeah.
And being willing to think outside of the box.
And it's a skill set that's, becoming increasingly valuable in today's world. Whether you're facing, personal challenges, professional dilemmas, or these big, global issues, the ability to think critically and creatively, that's essential.
Okay, so let's wrap things up, I guess, with those transcripts that focus on self-reflection and personal growth. I always find those to be the most thought-provoking.
Me too. They remind us that whole journey of self-discovery, it's ongoing.
Right.
And that we all have the capacity to grow and evolve, throughout our entire lives.
It's about being honest with ourselves, acknowledging our strengths and weaknesses, and setting intentions for who we want to become.
And it's not always easy. Self-reflection can be uncomfortable at times, but it's also incredibly rewarding. It allows us to, gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and our motivations and our values.
And that self-awareness, I think, is essential for living a more, authentic and fulfilling life.
Exactly. It allows us to make choices that are aligned with our values. to build more meaningful relationships and to contribute to the world in a way that feels really purposeful.
Yeah, it's so true. It allows us, like you said, to make choices that are aligned with our values, build those stronger relationships, and really contribute to the world, in a way that feels authentic and purposeful.
All right, feels like we've covered so much ground in this deep dive, from vacation plans to Victorian families to the future of learning. Wow.
It is amazing, though, isn't it, how all of these seemingly disparate topics are actually so interconnected?
Yeah, it really is. And it's a good reminder, I think, that learning isn't just about, acquiring all this knowledge. It's about making those connections, challenging those assumptions and expanding our understanding of the world and ourselves.
It's like, we've been on this whirlwind tour of just the human experience, from like the everyday stuff to the really extraordinary. Yeah, and that's what I love about these deep dives. You never know where the connections are going to lead. We started talking about vacation plans and ended up, pondering the very nature of family and the future of learning.
It's a testament to, I think, the richness and complexity of human life, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And it also makes you realize that even, the most mundane YouTube transcript can still hold like a little nugget of insight or spark, a really profound thought.
Speaking of those profound thoughts, I keep coming back to something that we kind of touched on earlier, the impact of technology on families. We talked about the online safety piece for kids, but what about those broader implications,
Oh, like how technology is changing, the way we communicate and connect with each other, or maybe how it's impacting work-life balance. Is that what you're thinking?
Exactly. And what about, the rise of AI? Like, how might that shape family dynamics in the future? Will we see, like, AI companions playing a role in, I don't know, childcare or elder care even?
Whoa, those are some huge questions. I hadn't even considered that whole AI angle. I feel like we need another deep dive just to unpack that topic.
It's a whole new frontier, right? Full of, I think, possibilities and potential pitfalls. And it's unfolding right before our eyes, which is kind of wild.
It's both really exciting and a little bit daunting, isn't it? To think about how rapidly technology is changing, and how it's really shaping like the very fabric of our lives.
It really is. But it also, I think, underscores the importance of staying informed and engaging in these types of conversations, asking those right questions.
Well said. So to our listener out there, we've only just scratched the surface here, We've shared some insights, explored some connections, but ultimately, like, the most important part of this whole deep dive is what you take away from it. What stood out to you? What new questions are you asking yourself now?
Yeah, what rabbit holes are you going to go down and explore, further?
Because, that's the beauty of knowledge. It's not a destination, it's an ongoing journey. So keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and keep diving deep.